sure to subscribe our channel to show us support and press the bell icon to get notified about our future videos. You may pause the video at times to read the questions or the answers at your own pace. To the questions. Question 1. You are designing storage for Azure data. You need to store documents that will be updated by applications on Linux-based client systems. The Linux-based systems will connect by using the NFS protocol. Which Azure Storage Account Service should you use? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Azure Blob Storage, B. Azure Files, C. Azure Queue Storage, or D. Azure Table Storage. The correct option is B. Azure Files. Azure Files operates as a file server and directly supports the NFS protocol. Queue Storage implements queues for messages or event passing. Blob Storage can hold the files but does not directly support the NFS protocol. Table Storage is used to hold key/value pairs. Question 2. You need to recommend a solution to generate a monthly report of all the new Azure Resource Manager resource deployments in your Azure subscription. What should you include in the recommendation? Our options are A. Azure Activity Log, B. Azure Advisor, C. Azure Analysis Services, or D. Azure Monitor Action Groups. The correct option is A. Azure Activity Log. Activity logs are kept for 90 days. You can query for any range of dates as long as the starting date isn't more than 90 days in the past. Through activity logs, you can determine what operations were taken on the resources in your subscription, who started the operation, when the operation occurred, the status of the operation, the values of other properties that might help you research the operation. Question 3. You have an on-premises file server that you plan to migrate to Azure. The existing file server has Unix clients that connect by using the NFS protocol and Windows clients that connect by using the SMB protocol. Interoperability between the clients is required. To what should you migrate the file server data? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Azure Blob Storage, B. Azure Files, C. Azure NetApp Files, or D. Azure Table Storage. The correct answer is C. Azure NetApp Files. Azure NetApp Files offers concurrent support and interoperability between both SMB-based and NFS-based clients. Blob Storage does not offer SMB support. No interoperability between protocols is offered by Azure Files. Table Storage does not provide file storage or meet the interoperability requirements. Question 4. You are designing the access control strategy for an Azure Data Lake storage solution. You need to ensure that a predefined ACL is used for all new files and folders in a folder named root. What should you do? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Create a default ACL for each folder in root, B. Create a default ACL for root, C. Create an access ACL for each folder in root, or D. Create an access ACL for root. The correct option is B. Create a default ACL for root. Creating a default ACL for root defines the ACL for new folders and files. Creating an access ACL for each folder in root or creating a default ACL for each folder in root does not solve the issue for the files in root. Creating an access ACL for root only changes the ACL for root, not its child objects. Question 5. You have an application that is used by 6,000 users to validate their vacation request. The application manages its own credential store. Users must enter a username and password to access the application. The application does not support identity providers. You plan to upgrade the application to use single sign-on authentication by using an Azure AD application registration. Which SSO method should you use? Our options are A. Header based, B. SML, C. Password based, or D. OpenID Connect. The correct option is C. Password based. On-premises applications can use a password-based method for SSO. This choice works when applications are configured for application proxy. With password-based SSO, users sign into the application with a username and password the first time they access it. After the first sign-on, Azure AD provides the username and password to the application. Password-based SSO enables secure application password storage and replay using a web browser extension or mobile app. This option uses the existing sign-in process provided by the application, enables an administrator to manage the passwords, and does not require the user to know the password. Question 6. You have the resources shown in the following table. CDB1 hosts a container that stores continuously updated operational data. You are designing a solution that will use AS1 to analyze the operational data daily. You need to recommend a solution to analyze the data without affecting the performance of the operational data store. What should you include in the recommendation? Our options are A. Azure Cosmos DB change feed, B. Azure Data Factory with Azure Cosmos DB and Azure Synapse Analytics connectors, C. Azure Synapse link for Azure Cosmos DB, or D. Azure Synapse Analytics with Polybase data loading. The correct option is C. Azure Synapse link for Azure Cosmos DB. Azure Synapse link for Azure Cosmos DB creates a tight integration between Azure Cosmos DB and Azure Synapse Analytics. It enables customers to run near real-time analytics over their operational data with full performance isolation from their transactional workloads and without an ETL pipeline. Question 7. You are designing an Azure governance solution. All Azure resources must be easily identifiable based on the following operational information: environment, owner, department, and cost center. You need to ensure that you can use the operational information when you generate reports for the Azure resources. What should you include in the solution? Our options are A. An Azure data catalog that uses the Azure REST API as a data source, B. An Azure management group that uses parent groups to create a hierarchy, C. An Azure policy that enforces tagging rules, or D. Azure AD administrative units. The correct option is C. An Azure policy that enforces tagging rules. You apply tags to your Azure resources, resource groups, and subscriptions to logically organize them into a taxonomy. Each tag consists of a name and a value pair. You use Azure policy to enforce tagging rules and conventions. By creating a policy, you avoid the scenario of resources being deployed to your subscription that don't have the expected tags for your organization. Instead of manually applying tags or searching for resources that aren't compliant, you create a policy that automatically applies the needed tags during deployment. Question 8. Your company has the divisions as shown in the following table. Sub 1 contains an Azure App Service web app named App1. App1 uses Azure AD for single tenant user authentication. Users from contours.com can authenticate to App1. You need to recommend a solution to enable users in the fabricam.com tenant to authenticate to App1. What should you recommend? Our options are A. Configure the Azure AD provisioning service, B. Enable Azure AD pass-through authentication and update the sign-in endpoint, C. Use Azure AD entitlement management to govern external users, or D. Configure Azure AD join. The correct option is C. Use Azure AD entitlement management to govern external users. Entitlement management is an identity governance capability that enables organizations to manage identity and access lifecycle at scale by automating access request workflows, access assignments, reviews, and expiration. Entitlement management allows delegated non-admins to create access packages that external users from other organizations can request access to. One and multi-stage approval workflows can be configured to evaluate requests and provision users for time-limited access with recurring reviews. Entitlement management enables policy-based provisioning and deprovisioning of external accounts. Question 9. You have an app named App1 that uses two on-premises Microsoft SQL Server databases named DB1 and DB2. You plan to migrate DB1 and DB2 to Azure. You need to recommend an Azure solution to host DB1 and DB2. The solution must meet the following requirements: support server-side transactions across DB1 and DB2, minimize administrative effort to upgrade the solution. What should you recommend? Our options are A. Two Azure SQL databases in an elastic pool. B. Two databases on the same Azure SQL managed instance. C. Two databases on the same SQL Server instance on the Azure virtual machine. Or D. Two Azure SQL databases on different Azure SQL database servers. The correct option is B. Two databases on the same Azure SQL managed instance. Elastic database transactions for Azure SQL database and Azure SQL managed instance allow you to run transactions that span several databases. SQL managed instance enables system administrators to spend less time on administrative tasks because the service either performs them for you or greatly simplifies those tasks. Question 10. You are developing an app that will read activity logs for an Azure subscription by using Azure Functions. You need to recommend an authentication solution for Azure Functions. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you include in the recommendation? Our options are A. An enterprise application in Azure AD. B. System assigned managed identities. C. Shared access signature. Or D. Application registration in Azure AD. The correct option is B. System assigned managed identities. System assigned managed identities reduce administrative efforts. B makes more sense. Question 11. Hotspot. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure Key Vault named KV1 and a virtual machine named VM1. VM1 runs Windows Server 2022 Azure Edition. You plan to deploy an ASP.NET Core-based application named App1 to VM1. You need to configure App1 to use a system-assigned managed identity to retrieve secrets from KV1. The solution must minimize development effort. What should you do? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, configure App1 to use OAuth 2.0. Our options are authorization code grant flows, client credentials grant flows, implicit grant flows. The correct option is client credentials grant flows. To the next statement, configure App1 to use a REST API call to retrieve an authentication token from the, our options are Azure Instance Metadata Service Endpoint, OAuth 2.0 Access Token Endpoint of Azure AD, OAuth 2.0 Access Token Endpoint of Microsoft Identity Platform. The correct option is OAuth 2.0 Access Token Endpoint of Azure AD. Question 12. You need to recommend a protection strategy for files stored in an Azure storage account. The solution must meet the following requirements. Protection must last for 5 years. During the retention period, new objects can be created. During the retention period, files must not be deleted or modified. After the retention period, files can be deleted, but they cannot be modified. What should you recommend using to apply the protection? Select only one answer. Our options are A. A legal hold policy. B. A delete lock. C. A time-based retention policy. Or D. An update lock. In this question, keeping the scenario in mind, the correct option is C. A time-based retention policy. During the retention period of a time-based retention policy, files can be created and read, but they cannot be modified or deleted. When the retention period expires, file can be deleted but not modified. This meets the requirements. Question 13. You plan to deploy an app that will use an Azure storage account. You need to deploy the storage account. The storage account must meet the following requirements. Store the data for multiple users. Encrypt each user's data by using a separate key. Encrypt all the data in the storage account by using customer managed keys. What should you deploy? Our options are A. Files in a premium file share storage account. B. Blobs in a general purpose V2 storage account. C. Blobs in a Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account. Or D. Files in a general purpose V2 storage account. The correct answer is B. Blobs in a general purpose V2 storage account. You can specify a customer provided key on blob storage operations. A client making a read or write request against blob storage can include an encryption key on the request for granular control over how blob data is encrypted and decrypted. Question 14. You have an Azure subscription. The subscription has a blob container that contains multiple blobs. 10 users in the finance department of your company plan to access the blobs during the month of April. You need to recommend a solution to enable access to the blobs during the month of April only. Which security solution should you include in the recommendation? Our options are A. Shared access signatures. B. Conditional access policies. C. Certificates. Or D. Access keys. The correct option is A. Shared access signatures. Shared access signatures allows for limited time fine-grained access control to resources. So you can generate URL, specify duration, and disseminate URL to 10 team members. On May 1, the SAS token is automatically invalidated, denying team members continued access. Question 15. You have an Azure AD tenant named Contoso.com that has a security group named Group 1. Group 1 is configured for assigned membership. Group 1 has 50 members, including 20 guest users. You need to recommend a solution for evaluating the membership of Group 1. The solution must meet the following requirements. The evaluation must be repeated automatically every 3 months. Every member must be able to report whether they need to be in Group 1. Users who report that they do not need to be in Group 1 must be removed from Group 1 automatically. Users who do not report whether they need to be in Group 1 must be removed from Group 1 automatically. What should you include in the recommendation? Our options are A. Implement Azure AD Identity Protection. B. Change the membership type of Group 1 to Dynamic User. C. Create an access review. Or D. Implement Azure AD Privileged Identity Management. The correct option is C. Create an access review. Azure AD access reviews enable organizations to efficiently manage group memberships, access to enterprise applications, and role assignments. Users' access can be reviewed on a regular basis to make sure only the right people have continued access. Question 16. Drag drop. You have an Azure subscription. The subscription contains Azure virtual machines that run Windows Server 2016 and Linux. You need to use Azure Monitor to design an alerting strategy for security-related events. Which Azure Monitor logs tables should you query? To answer, drag the appropriate tables to the correct log types. Each table may be used once, more than once, or not at all. You may need to drag the split bar between panes or scroll to view content. Note, each selection is worth 1 point. Select and place. The tables provided to us are Azure Activity, Azure Diagnostics, Event, syslog. To the answer area, events from Windows Events log. The correct option is event. To the next statement, events from Linux system logging. The correct option is syslog. Question 17. Drag drop. Your on-premises network contains a server named Server 1 that runs an ASP.NET application named App1. You have a hybrid deployment of Azure AD. You need to recommend a solution to ensure that users sign in by using their Azure AD account and Azure multi-factor authentication when they connect to App1 from the internet. Which 3 features should you recommend be deployed and configured in sequence? To answer, move the appropriate features from the list of features to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. Select and place. The features provided to us are a public Azure load balancer, a managed identity, an internal Azure load balancer, a conditional access policy, an Azure App Service Plan, Azure AD Application Proxy, an Azure AD Enterprise application? To the answer area, the correct options in the right orders are Azure AD Application Proxy and Azure AD Enterprise Application, a conditional access policy. Step 1. Azure AD Application Proxy. Start by enabling communication to Azure data centers to prepare your environment for Azure AD Application Proxy. Step 2. An Azure AD Enterprise Application. Add an on-premises app to Azure AD. Now that you have prepared your environment and installed the connector, you are ready to add on-premises applications to Azure AD. Sign in as an administrator in the Azure portal. In the left navigation panel, select Azure AD. Select Enterprise Applications and then select New Application. Question 18. Hotspot. You plan to deploy an Azure web app named App1 that will use the Azure AD authentication. App1 will be accessed from the internet by the users at your company. All the users have computers that run Windows 10 and are joined to Azure AD. You need to recommend a solution to ensure that users can connect to App1 without being prompted for authentication and can access App1 only from company-owned computers. What should you recommend for each requirement? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each right selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, the users can connect to App1 without being prompted for authentication. Our options are an Azure AD app registration, an Azure AD managed identity, Azure AD application proxy. The correct option is an Azure AD app registration. To the next statement, the users can access App1 only from company-owned computers. Our options are a conditional access policy, an Azure AD administrative unit, Azure Applications Gateway, Azure Blueprints, and Azure Policy. The correct option is a conditional access policy. In box 1, Azure AD provides cloud-based directory and identity management service. You can use Azure AD to manage users of your application and authenticate access to your applications using Azure AD. You register your application with Azure Active Directory Tenant. About box 2, conditional access policies at their simplest are if-then statements. If a user wants to access a resource, then they must complete an action. By using conditional access policies, you can apply the right access controls when needed to keep your organization secure and stay out of your user's way when not needed. Question 19. Hotspot. You have an Azure subscription that contains 300 virtual machines that run Windows Server 2019. You need to centrally monitor all warning events in the system logs of the virtual machines. What should you include in the solution? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each right selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, resource to create in Azure. Our options are an event hub, a log analytics workspace, a search service, a storage account. The correct option is a log analytics workspace. To the next statement, configuration to perform on the virtual machines. Our options are create event subscriptions, configure continuous delivery, install the Azure Monitor agent, modify the membership of the event log readers group. The correct option is install the Azure Monitor agent. About box 1, send resource logs to a log analytics workspace to enable the features of Azure Monitor logs. You must create a diagnostic setting for each Azure resource to send its resource logs to a log analytics workspace to use with Azure Monitor logs. About box 2, use the Azure Monitor agent if you need to collect guest logs and metrics from any machine in Azure, in other clouds, or on-premises. Manage data collection configuration centrally. Question 20. Hotspot. You need to design an Azure policy that will implement the following functionality. For new resources, assign tags and values that match the tags and values of the resource group to which the resources are deployed. For existing resources, identify whether the tags and values match the tags and values of the resource group that contains the resources. For any non-compliant resources, trigger auto-generated remediation task to create missing tags and values. The solution must use the principle of least privilege. What should you include in the design? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, Each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, Azure policy effect to use. Our options are append, enforce OPA constraint, enforce REGO policy, modify. The correct option is modify. To the next statement, Azure AD object and role based access control role to use for the remediation tasks. Our options are a managed identity with the contributor role, a managed identity with the user access administrator role, a service principal with the contributor role, a service principal with the user access administrator role. The correct option is a managed identity with the contributor role. About box 1, modify is used to add, update, or remove properties or tags on a subscription or resource during creation or update. A common example is updating tags on resources such as cost center. Existing non-compliant resources can be remediated with a remediation task. A single modify rule can have any number of operations. Policy assignments with effect set as modify require a managed identity to do remediation. About box 2, the managed identity needs to be granted the appropriate roles required for remediating resources to grant the managed identity. Contributor can create and manage all types of Azure resources but can't grant access to others. Question 21. Hotspot. You have an Azure subscription named Sub1 that is linked to an Azure AD tenant named Contoso.com. You plan to implement two ASP.NET Core apps named App1 and App2 that will be deployed to 100 virtual machines in Sub1. Users will sign in to App1 and App2 by using their Contoso.com credentials. App1 requires read permissions to access the calendar of the signed in user. App2 requires write permissions to access the calendar of the signed in user. You need to recommend an authentication and authorization solution for the apps. The solution must meet the following requirements. Use the principle of least privilege. Minimize administrative effort. What should you include in the recommendation? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, authentication. Our options are application registration in Azure AD, a system assigned managed identity, or a user assigned managed identity. The correct option is a user assigned managed identity. To the next statement, authorization. Our options are application permissions, Azure role-based access control, or delegated permissions. The correct option is delegated permissions. The question states that we have to minimize the administrative effort and managed identities do just that. Additionally, we have 100 VMs, so user assigned managed identities can be used as it can be shared unlike system assigned one. I researched a bit and found one helpful article which contains this sentence. Previously, when we did not have managed identities, we created an application registration for the resource using a secret or certificate to authenticate with Azure. This created a lot of overhead as it required secret management, key rotation, etc. With managed identities, Azure takes care of this for us. So I believe that although app registration could be used, it wouldn't reduce admin effort as much as managed identity. Question 22. Your company has the divisions shown in the following table. Sub1 contains Azure App Service web app named App1. App1 uses Azure AD for single tenant user authentication. Users from Contoso.com can authenticate to App1. You need to recommend a solution to enable users in the Fabricam.com tenant to authenticate to App1. What should you recommend? Our options are A. Configure Azure AD identity protection. B. Configure assignments for the Fabricam.com users by using Azure AD Privileged Identity Management. C. Configure supported account types in the application registration and update the sign-in endpoint. Or D. Configure a conditional access policy. The correct option is C. Configure supported account types in the application registration and update the sign-in endpoint. Question 23. You have an Azure subscription that contains 1000 resources. You need to generate compliance reports for the subscription. The solution must ensure that the resources can be grouped by department. What should you use to organize the resources? Our options are A. Application groups and quotas, B. Azure policy and tags, C. Administrative units and Azure Lighthouse, or D. Resource groups and role assignments. The correct option is B. Azure policy and tags. Question 24. Hotspot. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet1 and 10 virtual machines. The virtual machines are connected to VNet1. You need to design a solution to manage the virtual machines from the internet. The solution must meet the following requirements. Incoming connections to the virtual machines must be authenticated by using Azure multi-factor authentication before network connectivity is allowed. Incoming connections must use TLS and connect to TCP port 443. The solution must support RDP and SSH. What should you include in the solution? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area. Statement. To provide access to virtual machines on VNet1, use. Our options are Azure Bastion, just-in-time VM access, Azure Web Application Firewall in Azure Front Door. The correct option is Azure Bastion. To our next statement, to enforce Azure MFA, use. Our options are an Azure Identity Governance Access Package, a conditional access policy that has the Cloud Apps assignment set to Azure Windows VM sign-in, a conditional access policy that has the Cloud Apps assignment set to Microsoft Azure Management. The correct option is a conditional access policy that has the Cloud Apps assignment set to Azure Windows VM sign-in. About Box 1, it provides secure and seamless RDP/SSH connectivity to your virtual machines directly from the Azure portal over TLS, while JIT access allow access via RDP or SSH. Incoming connections is not TLS TCP 443. About Box 2, you can enforce conditional access policies such as multi-factor authentication or user sign-in risk check before authorizing access to Windows virtual machines in Azure that are enabled with Azure AD sign-in. To apply conditional access policy, you must select the Azure Windows VM sign-in app from the Cloud Apps or Actions assignment option and then use sign-in risk as a condition and /or require multi-factor authentication as a grant access control. Question 25. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to deploy a monitoring solution that will include the following: Azure Monitor Network Insights, Application Insights, Microsoft Sentinel, VM Insights. The monitoring solution will be managed by a single team. What is the minimum number of Azure Monitor Workspace required? Our options are A1, B2, C3, D4. The correct option is A1. You only need a single Azure Monitor Log Analytics workspace for all these monitoring solutions. Here is why: Azure Monitor Network Insights, Application Insights, Microsoft Sentinel, and VM Insights. All of these components can send their data to a Log Analytics workspace. The workspace is a unique environment for Azure Monitor log data. Each workspace has its own data repository and configuration, and data sources and solutions are configured to store their data in a warehouse. Therefore, a single Azure Monitor Log Analytics workspace can be utilized to collect and analyze data from all the components of the monitoring solution. This will also enable a unified management and analysis of the collected data. Question 26. You have an Azure subscription that contains an Azure Blob storage account named Store1. You have an on-premises file server named Server1 that runs Windows Server 2016. Server1 stores 500 GB of company files. You need to store a copy of the company files from Server1 in Store1. Which two possible Azure services achieve this goal? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. Our options are A. an Azure Logic Apps integration account, B, an Azure import/export job, C, Azure Data Factory, D, an Azure Analysis Services on-premises data gateway, or E, an Azure batch account. The correct options are B and C, that is an Azure import/export job, and Azure Data Factory. About B, you can use the Azure import/export service to securely export large amounts of data from Azure Blob storage. This service requires you to ship empty drives to the Azure data center. The service exports data from your storage account to the drives and then ships the drives back. About C, big data requires a service that can orchestrate and operationalize processes to refine these enormous stores of raw data into actionable business insights. Azure Data Factory is a managed cloud service that is built for these complex hybrid extract load transform, and data integration projects. Question 27. You need to design a highly available Azure SQL database that meets the following requirements. Failover between replicas of the database must occur without any data loss. The database must remain available in the event of a zone outage. Costs must be minimized. Which deployment option should you use? Our options are A. Azure SQL Database Hyperscale, B. Azure SQL Database Premium, C. Azure SQL Database Basic, or D. Azure SQL Managed Instance General Purpose. The correct option is B. Azure SQL Database Premium. Azure SQL Database Premium tier supports multiple redundant replicas for each database that are automatically provisioned in the same data center within a region. This design leverages the SQL Server always-on technology and provides resilience to server failures with 99.99% availability, SLA, and RPO equals 0. With the introduction of Azure Availability Zones, we are happy to announce that SQL Database now offers built-in support of availability zones in its premium service tier. Question 28. You have an Azure subscription that contains two applications named App1 and App2. App1 is a sales processing application. When a transaction in App1 requires shipping, a message is added to an Azure storage account queue, and then App2 listens to the queue for relevant transactions. In the future, additional applications will be added that will process some of the shipping requests based on the specific details of the transactions. You need to recommend a replacement for the storage account queue to ensure that each additional application will be able to read the relevant transactions. What should you recommend? The correct option is D. One Azure Service Bus Topic. A queue allows processing of a message by a single consumer. In contrast to queues, topics and subscriptions provide a one-to-many form of communication in a publish and subscribe pattern. It is useful for scaling to large numbers of recipients. Each published message is made available to each subscription registered with the topic. Publisher sends a message to a topic and one or more subscribers receive a copy of the message, depending on filter rules set on these subscriptions. Question 29. You are designing an application that will be hosted in Azure. The application will host video files that range from 50 MB to 12 GB. The application will use certificate-based authentication and will be available to users on the internet. You need to recommend a storage option for the video files. The solution must provide the fastest read performance and must minimize storage cost. What should you recommend? Our options are A. Azure Files, B. Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, C. Azure Blob Storage, or D. Azure SQL Database. The correct option is C. Azure Blob Storage. It stores large amounts of unstructured data, such as text or binary data, that can be accessed from anywhere in the world via HTTP or HTTPS. You can use blob storage to expose data publicly to the world or to store application data privately. Max file in blob storage is of 4.77 TB. Question 30. Hotspot. You are designing an app that will be hosted on Azure virtual machines that run Urban 2. The app will use a third-party email service to send email messages to the users. The third-party email service requires that the app authenticate by using an API key. You need to recommend an Azure Key Vault solution for storing and accessing the API key. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you recommend using to store and access the key? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, storage. Our options are certificate, key, secret. The correct option is secret. To the next statement, access. Our options are an API token, a managed service identity, a service principal. The correct option is a managed service identity. Question 31. Drag drop. You have two app registrations named App1 and App2 in Azure AD. App1 supports role-based access control and includes a role named writer. You need to ensure that when App2 authenticates to access App1, the tokens issued by Azure AD include the writer role claim. Which blade should you use to modify each app registration? To answer, drag the appropriate blades to the correct app registrations. Each blade may be used once, more than once, or not at all. You may need to drag the split bar between panes or scroll to view content. The blades provided to us are API permissions, app roles, and token configuration. To the answer area, App1. The correct blade is app roles. To the next statement, App2. The correct blade is token configuration. Question 32. You have 100 servers that run Windows Server 2012 R2 and host Microsoft SQL Server 2014 instances. The instances host databases that have the following characteristics. Stored procedures are implemented by using CLR. The largest database is currently 3 TB. None of the databases will ever exceed 4 TB. You plan to move all data from SQL Server to Azure. You need to recommend a service to host the databases. The solution must meet the following requirements. Whenever possible, minimize management overhead for the migrated database. Ensure that users can authenticate by using Azure AD credentials. Minimize the number of database changes required to facilitate the migration. What should you include in the recommendation? Our options are A. Azure SQL Database Elastic Pools, B. Azure SQL Managed Instance, C. Azure SQL Database Single Databases, or D. SQL Server 2016 on Azure Virtual Machines. The correct option is B. Azure SQL Managed Instance. SQL Managed Instance allows existing SQL Server customers to lift and shift their on-premises application to the cloud with a minimal application and database changes. At the same time, SQL Managed Instance preserves all PaaS capabilities that drastically reduce management overhead and TCO. Question 33. You are planning an Azure IoT Hub solution that will include 50,000 IoT devices. Each device will stream data, including temperature, device ID, and time data. Approximately 50,000 records will be written every second. The data will be visualized in near real time. You need to recommend a service to store and query the data. Which two services can you recommend? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. Our options are A. Azure Table Storage, B. Azure Event Grid, C. Azure Cosmos DB SQL API, or D. Azure Time Series Insights. The correct options are C and D. Azure Cosmos DB SQL API and Azure Time Series Insights. About option D, Time Series Insights is a fully managed service for time series data. In this architecture, Time Series Insights performs the role of stream processing, data store, and analytics and reporting. It accepts streaming data from either IoT Hub or Event Hub and stores, processes, analyzes, and displays the data in near real time. The processed data is stored in an analytical data store such as Azure Data Explorer, HBase, Azure, Cosmos DB, Azure Data Lake, or Blob storage. Question 34. You store web access logs data in Azure Blob storage. You plan to generate monthly reports from the access logs. You need to recommend an automated process to upload data to the Azure SQL database every month. What should you include in the recommendation? Our options are A. Microsoft SQL Server Migration Assistant, B. Data Migration Assistant, C. AZ Copy, or D. Azure Data Factory? The correct option is D. Azure Data Factory. You can create data factory pipelines that copies data from Azure Blob Storage to Azure SQL Database. The configuration pattern applies to copying from a file-based data store to a relational data store. The required steps are listed below. Question 35. You have an Azure subscription that contains a custom application named Application1. Application1 was developed by external company named Fabricam Limited. Developers at Fabricam were assigned role-based access control permissions to the Application1 components. All users are licensed for the Microsoft 365 E5 plan. You need to recommend a solution to verify whether the Fabricam developers still require permissions to Application1. The solution must meet the following requirements. To the manager of the developers, send a monthly email message that lists the access permissions to Application1. If the manager does not verify an access permission, automatically revoke that permission. Minimize development effort. What should you recommend? The correct option is A. In Azure Active Directory, create an access review of Application1. Question 36. You are designing a SQL database solution. The solution will include 20 databases that will be 20 GB each and have varying usage patterns. You need to recommend a database platform to host the databases. The solution must meet the following requirements. The solution must meet a service level agreement of 99.99% uptime. The computer resources allocated to the databases must scale dynamically. The solution must have reserved capacity. Compute charges must be minimized. What should you include in the recommendation? Our options are A. An elastic pool that contains 20 Azure SQL databases. B. 20 databases on a Microsoft SQL server that runs on an Azure virtual machine in an availability set. C. 20 databases on a Microsoft SQL server that runs on the Azure virtual machine. Or D. 20 instances on Azure SQL database serverless. The correct option is A. An elastic pool that contains 20 Azure SQL databases. The compute and storage redundancy is built in for business critical databases and elastic pools with a SLA of 99.99%. Reserved capacity provides you with the flexibility to temporarily move your hot databases in and out of elastic pools as part of your normal operations without losing the reserved capacity benefit. Question 37. You are designing an application that will aggregate content for users. You need to recommend a database solution for the application. The solution must meet the following requirements. Support SQL commands, support multi-master writes, guarantee low latency read operations. What should you include in the recommendation? Our options are A. Azure Cosmos DB SQL API, B. Azure SQL Database that uses Active Azure application, C. Azure SQL Database Hyperscale, or D. Azure Database for PostgreSQL. The correct option is A. Azure Cosmos DB SQL API. With Cosmos DB's novel multi-region writes application protocol, every region supports both writes and reads. The multi-region writes capabilities also enables unlimited elastic write and read scalability, 99.999% read and write availability all around the world, guaranteed reads and writes served in less than 10 milliseconds at the 99th percentile. Question 38. You have an Azure App Service web app that writes data to an Azure SQL database. You plan to configure the database to use the always encrypted feature. You need to recommend a solution to ensure that the web app can write encrypted data. Which two actions should you include in the recommendation? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Select all answers that apply. Our options are A. Change the connection string used by the application. B. Change the SSL settings for the web app. C. Enable transparent data encryption. D. Store keys in Azure Key Vault. Or E. Store keys in the certificate store. The correct options are A and D. Change the connection string used by the application and store keys in the Azure Key Vault. You need to change the connection string to use always encrypted and access to the keys from a store such as Key Vault. Changing the SSL settings for the web app allows the use of SSL for in-transit encryption but not always encrypted. Question 39. You have an on-premises MongoDB application. You want to migrate the application to Azure. The application contains a large amount of code and significant redevelopment of the code is not being considered. You need to take advantage of global distribution and automated failover. To which type of database should you migrate the application? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Azure Cosmos DB, B. Azure SQL Database, C. Azure SQL Managed Instance, or D. MongoDB on an Azure virtual machine. The correct option is A. Azure Cosmos DB. Azure Cosmos DB is a multi-model database and offers SQL, MongoDB, Table, and Gremlin APIs. It offers global distribution and automated failover. The multi-model nature of the database helps avoid the need for significant code redevelopment when migrating. Question 40. You are designing a data storage solution in Azure. The solution must meet the following requirements. Provide read and write region replicas with eventual consistency. Store non-relational data. What should you include in the design? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Azure Cosmos DB, B. Azure SQL Database, C. Azure SQL Managed Instance, or D. Azure Synapse Analytics. The correct option is A. Azure Cosmos DB. Azure Cosmos DB provides read and write replicas with eventual consistency and can store non-relational data. Azure SQL databases, Azure Synapse Analytics, and SQL Managed Instance do not provide read-write replicas across regions with eventual consistency.